Chapter 6. Eunuchs to the left, Rugger, the Caledonian guard said. He was so muscular he looked like a sack full of nuts, but the most noticeable lump was the wen bulging grotesquely from his forehead. Hey, Halfman, that means you! Dorian shuffled into the line on the left, tearing his eyes away from the guard. He knew the man. A bastard who'd been whelped on some slave girl by one of Dorian's older brothers. The Aethelings, the throne-worthy sons, had tormented Rugger unrelentlessly. Dorian's tutor Neftata encouraged it. There was just one rule. They couldn't do harm to any slave that would keep him from performing his duties. Rugger's wen had been little Dorian's work. You staring at something? Rugger demanded, poking Dorian with his spear. Dorian looked resolutely at the floor and shook his head. He'd altered his appearance as much as he dared before coming to the citadel to ask for work, but he couldn't take any illusion too far. He would be beaten regularly. A guard or noble or atheling would notice if a blow didn't hit the proper resistance or if Dorian didn't flinch appropriately. He'd experimented with altering the balance of his humors so that he might stop growing a man's hair, too, but the results had been horrifying. He touched his chest, now mercifully back to male proportions, just thinking about it. Instead, he'd practiced until he'd swept his body with fire and air so as to be hairless. With the speed his beard came in, it would be a weave he would have to use twice a day. A slave's life included little privacy, so speed was essential. Mercifully, slaves were beneath notice, as long as they didn't draw attention to themselves by staring at guards as if they were freaks. Slouch or die, Dorian. Rugger smacked him again, but Dorian didn't move, so Rugger moved down the line to harass others. They were standing outside the bridge keep. 200 men and women were at the keep's west gate. Winter was coming, and even those who'd had good harvests had been beggared by the Cod King's armies. For the small folk, it hardly mattered if the army passed through was enemy or friend. One looted, the other scavenged, but each took what it wanted and killed anyone who resisted. With the God King emptying the citadel to send armies both south into Scenaria and north into the Freeze, the coming winter would be brutal. All the people in the line were hoping to sell themselves into slavery before winter arrived, and the lines quadrupled. It was an icy, clear autumn morning in the city of Caloris. 2 hours before dawn, Dorian had forgotten the glory of the northern stars. In the city, few lamps burned, oil was too precious, so few terrestrial fires tried to compete with the ethereal flames burning like holes in the cloak of heaven. Despite himself, Dorian couldn't help but feel a stirring of pride as he looked over the city that could have been his. Caloris was laid out in an enormous ring around the chasm that surrounded Mount Thrall. Succeeding generations of Ursal god kings had walled in semicircles of the city to protect their slaves and artisans and merchants until all the semicircles of different stone had connected to shield the whole of the city. There was only one hill, a narrow granite ridge up which the main road snaked in switchbacks designed to encumber siege weapons. At the top of the ridges the gatekeep sat like a toad on a stump, and just on the other side of the rusty iron portcullis's teeth lay Dorian's first great challenge. You 4, go, Rugger said. Dorian was third of 4 eunuchs, and all shivered as they approached the precipice. Lux Bridge was one of the wonders of the world, and in all his travels, Dorian had never seen magic to rival it. Without arches, without pillars, the bridge hung like a spider's anchor line for 400 paces between the gatekeep and the citadel of Mount Thrall. The last time he crossed Lux Bridge, Dorian had only noticed the brilliance of the magic, sparkling, springing underneath, coruscating in 1,000 colors at each step. Now he saw nothing but the building blocks to which the magic was anchored. Lux Bridge's mundane materials were not stone, metal, or wood. It was paved with human skulls, and a path wide enough for 3 horses to pass abreast. New heads had been added to whatever holes had formed over the years. Any Verdmeister, as masters of their Ver were called after they passed the 10th Shura, could dispel the entire bridge with a word. Dorian even knew the spell, for all the good it did him. What made his stomach knot was that the magic of Lux Bridge had been crafted so that magi, who used the talent rather than the foul Ver that Meisters and Verdmeisters use, would automatically be dropped. As perhaps the only person in Midicrew who had been trained as both Meister and Magus, Dorian thought he had a better chance of making the crossing than any other Magus. He'd bought new shoes last night and fitted a lead plate inside each sole. He thought he'd eliminated all traces of southern magic that might cling to him. Unfortunately, there was only one way to find out. Heart thudding, Dorian followed the eunuchs onto Lux Bridge. As at his first step, the bridge flared weirdly green, and Dorian felt his feet tingling as Ver reached up around his shoes. An instant later, it stopped, and no one had seen it. Dorian had done it. Lux Bridge felt that he was talented, but Dorian's ancestors had been smart enough to know that not every talented person was a mage. The rest of Dorian's steps shuffled like the other nervous eunuchs, brought sparks out of the magic that made the embedded skulls seem to yawn and shift as they stared hatefully at those who passed overhead. But they didn't give way. If Dorian felt some pride at the genius of Luxbridge, the sight of Mount Thrall brought only dread. He'd been born in the bowels of that damned rock, been starved in its dungeons, fought in its pits, and committed murder in its bedchambers and kitchens and halls. Within that mountain, Dorian would find his Verd, his destiny, his doom, his completion. He would also find the woman who would become his wife, and, he feared, he would find out why he had cast aside his gift of prophecy. What was so terrible that he wanted to throw away his foreknowledge of it? Mount Thrall was unnatural, an enormous four-sided black pyramid, twice as tall as it was wide, and extended deep below the earth. From Lux Bridge, Dorian looked down and saw clouds obscuring whatever depth lay below. 30 generations of slaves, both Caledonian and captured in war, had been sent into those depths, mining until they gasped out their last breaths in the putrid fumes and added their own bones to the ore. The pyramid of the mountain had been sheared straight down one edge and flattened, leaving a plateau in front of the great triangular dagger of mountain. The citadel sat on that plateau. It was dwarfed by the mountain, but as one approached, it became clear that the citadel was a city unto itself. It held barracks for 10,000 soldiers, great storerooms, vast cisterns, trading places for men and horses and wolves, armories, a dozen smithies, kitchens, stables, barns, stockyards, lumber yards, and space for all the workers, tools, and raw materials needed for 20,000 people to survive a year under siege. And even at that, the citadel was dwarfed in comparison to the castle that was Mount Thrall. For the mountain was honeycombed with halls and great rooms and apartments and dungeons and passages long forgotten that bored into its very roots. Neither the citadel nor the mountain had been full in decades, and with the armies sent north and south, the place was even quieter than usual. Caloris was now home to only the small folk, a skeleton crew of an army, less than half of the kingdom's meisters, enough functionaries to keep the reduced business of the kingdom operating, the aethelings, and the god king's wives and concubines, and their keepers. Head among those keepers was the chief eunuch, Yorbus Surga. Yorbus was an old, soft, perfectly hairless man. Even shaving his head and plucking his eyebrows and eyelashes, he sat huddled in an ermine cloak to ward off the morning chill at the servants' gate. Before him was a desk with a parchment unrolled on it. His blue eyes studied Dorian dubiously. "You're short," Chamberlain Zerg said. He himself had a typical eunuch's height. "And you're fat." "Yes, my lord." "Sir will suffice." "Yes, sir." Chamberlain Zerg stroked his hairless chin with fingers like sausages encased in jeweled rings. "You have an odd look about you." In his youth, Dorian had rarely seen Yorbus Zerg. He didn't think the man would remember him, but anything that caused greater scrutiny was dangerous. "Do you know the penalty of a man who attempts entry to the harem?" Zerg asked. Dorian shook his head and looked steadfastly at the ground. He clenched his jaw and, without raising his eyes, tucked his hair back behind his ears. It was what he considered a stroke of genius. He'd given himself silver streaks in his hair, paired with slightly pointed ears and several webbed toes. They were features that only one tribe in Calidor possessed. The Feyri claimed to be descended from the Fey folk, and were equally despised for that and their pacifism. Dorian appeared to be half Fury, which was exotic enough, and from a group despised enough, that he hoped no one would stop to think how his Caledonian half made him look a lot like Gareth Ursel. It also explained why he was short. "It's the other reason they call me Half-Man, sir." Yorbus Zerg clicked his tongue. "I see. Then here are the terms of your indenture. You will serve whatever hours are asked of you. Your first task will include emptying and cleaning the concubines' chamber pots. Your food will be cold and never as much as you'd like. You are forbidden to speak with the concubines, and if you have trouble with this, your tongue will be torn out. You understand?" Dorian nodded. "Then only one thing remains, Halfman. Sir, we have to make sure you're a Halfman after all. Remove your trousers."